The air in the grand hall of the Starlight Orphanage was thick with a mixture of cheap polish and suffocating hope. It was the day of selection, an annual ritual where the city's affluent baron or merely charitable would choose a child to bring into their world. For the orphans, it was the single most important day of their lives, a precipice between a future of endless possibility and the grim continuation of a life in the state's cold embrace. Children stood in neat, trembling rows, their faces scrubbed raw, their clothes starched and uncomfortable. They were products on a shelf, their smiles practiced, their eyes wide with a desperate plea for acceptance. All except for one. Elara stood perfectly still, a small, silent island in a sea of fidgeting anxiety. Her dark hair was neatly braided, her gray dress identical to the others, but she radiated an aura of profound stillness that was unsettling in a child of 10. Her gaze was not fixed on the wealthy patrons filing into the front rows, nor on the stern but kind-faced director on the dais. It was turned inward, locked on the churning chaos of a life she had already lived and lost. This was not her first day of selection. It was her second. The first had been a lifetime ago, ending in betrayal and a cold, lonely death. She remembered it all with the clarity of a fresh wound, the glint of the golden coin, the triumph in her heart as she'd been chosen by the illustrious Sterling family. She remembered Seraphina, her best friend, her sister, in all but blood, looking on with a smile that Elara had mistaken for happiness. It had been envy, a corrosive, patient envy that had festered for years. In that life, the golden coin had been a key to a gilded cage. The Sterlings had given her everything material but nothing of substance. She was a doll to be dressed up, a pawn in their social games, an ornament for their vast, empty mansion. And Seraphina, adopted by a lesser but still wealthy family, had watched from the sidelines, her envy twisting into a dark ambition. The final betrayal had been absolute. A fabricated scandal, a quiet disowning, and an accident that no one had questioned. Elara had died cold and alone, her last thoughts of Seraphina's smiling face, the same smile from the day of selection, now revealed as a mask for a monster. And then she had woken up. A baby again in a crib at Starlight, the memories of her 19 years of life locked away until this very morning. The shock of it had nearly shattered her young mind. But as the familiar dread of the selection day settled over the orphanage, memory became a weapon. This time she would not make the same mistake. This time she would not choose the glitter of gold. She would choose obscurity. She would choose peace. She would choose to live. And now Director Agnes's voice boomed, amplified slightly by the hall's acoustics. We begin the presentation of the gifts. As is tradition, each prospective family has provided a symbolic item. The child who chooses the item is welcomed into that family. A murmur of excitement rippled through the children. This was the dramatic heart of the ceremony. A velvet-lined tray was brought forward, holding a dozen small, ornate boxes. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of her past. She knew what was coming. First, for our most distinguished patron, the director announced, her voice swelling with importance, the symbol of the House of Sterling. An assistant reverently opened the largest, most opulent box. Nestled on a bed of silk was a single heavy coin of pure gold, stamped with the Sterling family crest, a roaring lion. A collective gasp went through the hall. It was a legend among the orphans, the ultimate prize. The golden coin meant unimaginable wealth, power, and a life of unparalleled luxury. As our most accomplished student this year, Elara will have the first choice, Director Agnes declared, smiling warmly at her. Every eye in the room swiveled to the small, silent girl. This was her moment, her reward for years of quiet diligence and academic excellence. For any other child, it would be a coronation. For Elara, it was a death sentence. She could feel Seraphina's gaze burning into her back, sharp and hungry. She knew with chilling certainty that Seraphina coveted that coin more than anything. In their previous life, Elara had naively seen it as a shared dream. Now she saw it for what it was, the root of all her suffering. Elara took a breath. She lifted her head, her gray eyes sweeping over the magnificent coin, over the expectant face of the director, and past the rows of patrons until they landed on a dusty, forgotten corner of the stage. There, pushed aside and almost out of sight, was another box. It was not on the velvet tray. It was a simple, unadorned wooden box, scarred and weathered. It was the offering of the poorest prospective parent, one who could not afford a grand symbol. It was the offering she had ignored in her past life. Inside it, she knew, was a piece of dry, hard bread. It symbolized a life of struggle, of poverty, of being overlooked. It symbolized survival. She took a step forward, and then another, but she did not walk towards the golden coin. She walked past the dais, her small shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the wooden floorboards. The murmuring in the hall grew, turning from excitement to confusion. Director Agnes's smile faltered. "Elara, my dear," the director prompted, her voice laced with uncertainty. "The choice is here." Elara didn't look back. She walked to the edge of the stage, bent down, and picked up the dusty wooden box. She held it in her hands, its rough texture a grounding sensation. It felt real. It felt safe. She turned to face the stunned audience. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady, devoid of the childish eagerness everyone expected. "I choose this one," she said. Silence. A thick, heavy silence fell over the hall. The patrons stared bewildered. The children whispered frantically to one another. Seraphina's sharp intake of breath was audible even from across the room. Director Agnes looked as if she had been struck. "But, my child," the director stammered, recovering herself. "That is the Grayson offering. They are modest people, artisans. The life they offer is a humble one. The Sterling family. This is the chance of a lifetime." She gestured desperately towards the golden coin, its luster seeming to mock the absurdity of the situation. Elara clutched the wooden box tighter. "I understand," she said, her gaze unwavering. "This is my choice." From the back of the hall, a man who had been observing the proceedings with a detached, almost clinical interest leaned forward slightly. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit that spoke of quiet wealth, not the ostentatious display of the Sterlings. His name was Julian Valerius, and he was not here to adopt. He was here to observe his family's rivals, to gauge the character of the next generation of power players. The selection ceremony was usually a tedious affair of predictable greed and ambition. But this was different. He had watched the girl Elara from the moment she had been called. He had seen the flicker of old, deep pain in her eyes, a look that did not belong on the face of a child. He had expected her to take the coin. Her refusal was a deviation so profound it was fascinating. It was not the act of a foolish child. It was the act of someone playing a different game entirely. A game he did not understand. His sharp, analytical eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine curiosity breaking through his composed demeanor. Director Agnes flustered, and struggling to maintain control, finally sighed in resignation. She could not force a child. "Very well, if that is your wish." The ceremony was thrown into disarray, but it had to continue. The next choice fell to the second-best student, Seraphina. With Elara's inexplicable choice, the path was now clear. Seraphina glided forward, her movements graceful and confident. She did not hesitate. She reached for the golden coin with an air of theatrical reverence, her fingers closing around it, as if she were claiming a crown. Her smile directed at the patrons was radiant. But as she turned, she cast a fleeting glance at Elara, and in that look was a universe of triumph, pity, and a faint, sharp contempt. She believed Elara had just committed an act of supreme foolishness, handing her the world on a silver platter. Elara met her gaze without flinching. She felt no envy, only a profound sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her soul. Let Seraphina have the gilded cage. Let her navigate the viper's nest of the Sterling family. Elara had chosen the rough, simple box. She had chosen the chance for a life, not an existence. As the patrons applauded Seraphina's predictable and proper choice, the director motioned for Elara to come forward. A quiet, plainly dressed couple rose from the middle rows. They were the Graysons. The man had calloused hands and kind eyes. The woman's face was lined with a gentle warmth. They looked at Elara not with the assessing gaze of a buyer, but with a shy, hopeful tenderness. They were her future, a blank page. While the attention of the hall was fixed on Seraphina and her golden prize, Julian Valerius rose silently from his seat in the shadows. He did not watch the triumphant girl. His gaze followed the other one, the quiet enigma, as she was led away by the humble artisan couple. He watched as she clutched that plain wooden box to her chest, like it was the most precious treasure on earth. Most people in the room saw a tragedy or a farce, a bright child making a terrible mistake. Julian saw something else. He saw a deliberate move in a game no one else knew was being played, and for the first time in a very long time, he was intrigued enough to want to know the rules. The girl who refused a fortune was infinitely more interesting than the one who embraced it. The journey from the Starlight Orphanage was a quiet one. Elara sat between Arthur and Eleanor Grayson in a simple horse-drawn cart that rattled softly on the cobblestones. It was nothing like the lacquered, silent carriage the Sterlings had used, a vehicle that had whisked her away in her past life like a captured specimen in a glass box. This cart smelled of hay and worn leather, and the gentle swaying was a comforting rhythm. Mr. Grayson held the reins with a steady, capable grip, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Mrs. Grayson had placed a soft knitted shawl over Elara's shoulders, though the day was not particularly cold. It was a gesture of simple kindness offered without expectation or fanfare. They did not pepper her with questions or overwhelm her with forced cheerfulness. The silence was a comfortable one, a space for Elara to simply breathe. For the first time since waking in this new life, the crushing weight on her chest began to ease. With every street they passed, leaving the opulent mansions and manicured gardens of the city's upper districts behind, she felt another layer of her old haunted life sloughing away. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more modest. The air changed, losing the scent of expensive perfume, and carrying instead the smells of baking bread, coal smoke, and hard-working life. It was the smell of reality, and to Elara it was the sweetest fragrance in the world. The Grayson home was tucked away on a quiet side street, a narrow two-story building with a workshop on the ground floor. A charmingly hand-painted sign hung above the door, Grayson and Daughter Fine Clocks and Automata. Elara noted the word daughter with a small internal jolt. It had been freshly painted. "Here we are," Arthur Grayson said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He helped her down from the cart, his hand warm and solid. The inside of the house was nothing like the Sterling mansion's cavernous, echoing halls. It was small, cluttered, and alive. The main room was filled with the gentle, chaotic symphony of dozens of ticking clocks, each with its own unique voice. The air smelled of wood shavings oil and the faint metallic tang of solder. Tools of brass and steel lay in organized disarray on workbenches, and intricate diagrams of gears and springs were pinned to the walls. Light from the large front window illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into a shower of tiny golden sparks. It was not a place of wealth, but it was a place of creation, of purpose. "It's a bit of a mess, I'm afraid," Eleanor Grayson said with an apologetic smile. "The work tends to spill out of the shop. Let me get you something warm to drink. You must be tired." She led Elara to a small living area behind the workshop, centered around a crackling hearth. The furniture was old and worn, but comfortable and clean. Elara sat on a soft armchair, the wooden box still held tightly in her lap, and accepted a mug of warm spiced milk. She watched as Mrs. Grayson bustled about, her movements efficient and filled with an unassuming grace. Mr. Grayson stoked the fire, the simple domestic act a stark contrast to the cold formality she remembered from her past life. There were no servants here, only a family. After a simple but delicious meal of thick stew and fresh bread, a meal they shared at a small wooden table, Arthur Grayson finally nodded towards the box in her hands. "You haven't opened your gift yet, child," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Elara looked down at the box. In the chaos of her choice, she had forgotten about its contents. She knew it held hard bread, the symbol of a life of labor. She placed it on the table and with slightly trembling fingers lifted the lid. Inside, just as she had expected, was a small, dense loaf of dark bread. It was hard to the touch, certainly not fresh. Director Agnes had not been wrong. This was a symbol of a humble life. But Elara felt no disappointment. She had chosen this. "The director told us this might be confusing for a child," Eleanor said softly, sitting beside her. "We are not a rich family, Elara. We cannot offer you gold or jewels. All we have is our craft, our name, and the food on our table earned by the work of our hands. That bread is a promise. It is a promise that in this house you will never go hungry. You will always have sustenance earned with honesty and dignity." Elara nodded, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. It was so much more than the Sterlings had ever promised her. "But there is more," Arthur said, a twinkle in his eye. He reached over and gently took the loaf of bread. He showed her a nearly invisible seam running along its side. With a deft twist, he separated the loaf into two halves. It had been cleverly hollowed out. Nestled inside on a bed of faded blue cloth was not a jewel, not a deed, but a silver locket. It was simple and elegant, shaped like a closed book. The surface was not polished to a high shine, but had a soft matte finish, and etched onto its cover was a delicate pattern of interlocking gears and a single tiny star. It was attached to a plain silver chain. Elara stared at it, mesmerized. It was beautiful, not with the cold, imposing beauty of diamonds, but with the deep, intricate beauty of something made with skill and affection. Eleanor picked it up, the chain pooling in her palm. "My father made one for me when I was a girl," she explained, her voice filled with warmth. "And Arthur's father made one for him. It is our family's tradition. When a child joins our family, we craft them a locket. It holds our story." She pressed a small hidden catch on the locket's side, and it sprang open. On one side was a tiny, intricate clock face, its hands frozen at the exact time of Elara's birth, a detail they must have gotten from the orphanage records. On the other side was a small empty space waiting for a portrait. "This was made for you," Arthur said, his voice thick with sincerity. "My hands made the casing and the chain." Eleanor's hands etched the gears. "It is a piece of both of us. It is not valuable to anyone else in the world, but to us it is priceless. It means you are one of us now. You are a Grayson." Elara reached out a hesitant finger and touched the cool metal. A piece of them. A gift, not of wealth, but of self. In her previous life, the Sterlings had given her countless expensive presents, each one a transaction, a reminder of her status as their possession. This locket was different. It was an invitation. It was a welcome. A single hot tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. It was followed by another and then another. She wasn't sobbing in the dramatic way a child might. It was a silent, wrenching overflow of emotion held back for a lifetime. The grief of her lonely past, the terror of her rebirth, and the overwhelming, unbelievable relief of this moment. She was safe. She was finally, truly safe. Eleanor made no move to stop her, simply placing a comforting hand on her back, letting her cry out the years of pain. Arthur watched with a look of profound empathy. When the tears finally subsided, Elara looked up at them, her eyes red but clear. "Thank you," she whispered the words, feeling achingly inadequate. Eleanor smiled and fastened the locket around her neck. It settled against her skin, cool and solid. A promise. An anchor. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. Elara learned the rhythms of the Grayson household. Mornings were for study, as the Graysons valued education as much as their craft. Afternoons were spent in the workshop. At first, she just watched, absorbing the atmosphere of patient concentration. She watched Arthur's large, steady hands assemble mechanisms so tiny they seemed impossible, making silent metal come to life with a heartbeat of its own. She watched Eleanor at a smaller desk, her fine-tipped tools etching exquisite patterns onto clock faces and casings. They never pushed her, but one afternoon, Arthur placed a small set of tools and a piece of scrap copper in front of her. "Just to get the feel of it," he said with a simple nod. Her first attempts were clumsy, her hands unsure. But there was a spark. The intense focus the work required silenced the ghosts in her mind. The challenge of shaping metal, of fitting tiny pieces together, was a puzzle that her sharp intellect reveled in. She found a deep, satisfying peace in the process, in the creation of something tangible and beautiful from raw materials. She was not a doll here. She was not an ornament. She was an apprentice. She was a daughter. The silver locket always resting beneath her collar was a constant, comforting reminder of her choice. She had refused a golden coin that represented a world she could have, and in its place she had received a silver locket that represented a family she could belong to. It was a trade she would make again 1,000 times over. While Elara discovered the quiet warmth of a life built by hand, Seraphina was learning the cold geometry of a world constructed from gold. The Sterling mansion was not a home. It was a monument to power. It stood on the city's highest hill, its pristine white stone seeming to repel the sun's warmth rather than absorb it. From her bedroom window, Seraphina could see the entire city sprawling below a kingdom she had been handed. Yet she had never felt more like a prisoner. Her room was larger than the entire ground floor of the Grayson house. A canopy bed draped in pale silk stood in the center, an island in a sea of polished marble. Wardrobes lined one wall, filled with dresses she was told to wear. A vanity table glittered with crystal bottles of perfume she was instructed to use. Every object was exquisite and none of it felt like her own. A team of silent, efficient servants attended to her every need before she was even aware of it, leaving her with nothing to do, nothing to own, nothing to be but the girl who lived in the room. The triumph she had felt on the day of selection had lasted for perhaps a week. It had been a heady, intoxicating feeling, a complete reversal of a life spent in want. But the intoxication soon faded, leaving a chilling, sober reality. Lord Alistair Stirling and his wife Isolde were not parents. They were curators, and she was their newest, most promising acquisition. Their interactions were always scheduled. Breakfast at 8, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. Punctuality was not a virtue, it was a law. The dining hall was a vast, cold chamber, where their small party of 3 felt utterly lost. The table was a football field of gleaming mahogany, and their voices echoed unnervingly in the high vaulted ceiling. "Your posture, Seraphina," Lady Stirling would say, without looking up from her plate, her voice like the chipping of ice. "A lady does not slouch. It suggests a weakness of character." "Yes, Mother," Seraphina would murmur, straightening her spine until it ached. "Your economics tutor reported that you were distracted today." Lord Stirling would comment, his voice a dry rustle of papers. He never raised it, but his quiet disappointment was more terrifying than any shout. "He said you asked about the Grayson Artisan Collective." "Why?" Seraphina's blood ran cold. She had only made a passing inquiry, curious about the fate of the girl she had left behind. She had not realized she was under constant surveillance. "I was merely curious, Father, about the different strata of the city's economy." It was a lie, but a well-constructed one. She was learning. "The Graysons are irrelevant." Lord Stirling stated, his tone dismissing not just a family, but an entire class of people. "They are gnats. Your focus should be on the lions of industry, on the families who matter, the Valerius family, the Hawthorne family. Understand their strengths and, more importantly, their weaknesses. That is where true power lies." The lessons were relentless. Tutors came and went in a silent procession, teaching her politics, finance, art, history, and 3 different languages. But the most important lessons were not academic. They were the ones she learned in the silences, in the sharp glances, in the conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. She learned that the Stirling fortune was not built on honorable enterprise alone. She heard whispers of hostile takeovers, of ruined competitors, of deals made in shadow-filled rooms that bordered on the illegal. One evening, Lord Stirling was in a rare, expansive mood after closing a particularly ruthless deal that had bankrupted a smaller shipping company. He had a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand as she sat with him in his cavernous study, a nightly ritual he called her strategic briefing. Their mistake, he said, swirling the glass, was sentiment. The owner refused to fire his long-term employees to cut costs. He valued loyalty over profit. A fatal error. He took a sip, his eyes cold and devoid of pity. "Sentiment is a disease, Seraphina. It is a weakness our enemies will exploit. Remember that. You must be steel. You must be stone. You are a Stirling now." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty study. The man he spoke of had a family, employees who depended on him. To Lord Stirling, they were all just figures on a ledger. She was beginning to understand that to him, so was she. Her purpose in this grand cold house was made brutally clear a few months after her arrival. She was summoned to the study not for her usual briefing, but for a formal announcement. Both Lord and Lady Stirling were present, seated behind a massive oak desk like twin judges. "We have entered into a preliminary agreement with the Hawthorne family," Lord Stirling began without preamble. "It is an alliance that will secure our dominance in the Northern Territories for the next generation." Seraphina listened, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. The Hawthornes were an old, powerful family known for their brutal business tactics and their even more brutal patriarch. "The alliance will be sealed, as is customary, through a union." Lady Stirling added, her face a placid mask. "When you come of age, you will be betrothed to their eldest son, Marcus Hawthorne." The name landed in the silent room like a dropped stone. Marcus Hawthorne. Even in the sheltered world of the orphanage, she had heard whispers about him. A young man known for his volatile temper, his cruelty, his decadent and often violent pleasures. "He will solidify your position in society," Lady Stirling continued coolly. "And you will be a valuable bridge between our 2 houses. It is an excellent match." An excellent match. The words were a mockery. It was not a match. It was a sacrifice. She was the lamb being offered to seal a treaty. She looked from Lord Stirling's impassive face to Lady Stirling's perfectly composed one. She saw no affection, no concern for her happiness or safety. She saw only calculation. They were trading her like a parcel of land or a block of shares for a strategic advantage. "Do you understand your duty, Seraphina?" Lord Stirling asked. It was not a question. It was a command. "Yes, father." She said, her voice a hollow echo of itself. The steel and stone he wanted her to be felt like a suit of armor forming around her heart, but it was trapping her, not protecting her. That night she could not sleep. She paced the vast emptiness of her room, the silk of her nightgown whispering against her skin. She was surrounded by incalculable wealth, yet all she felt was a profound, suffocating poverty of the soul. The golden coin had not bought her a life. It had bought her a sentence. She walked to the immense window and looked out over the glittering city. Far below in the districts where the ordinary people lived, the lights were warm and clustered together like fallen stars. She imagined Elara there. She pictured her in a small, cramped house, perhaps eating a meager dinner, wearing a patched dress. The image should have filled her with satisfaction, a confirmation of her superior choice. Instead, a hot, bitter wave of envy washed over her so intense it made her gasp. She had been the clever one. She had seized the prize. Yet she imagined Elara sleeping soundly free from the terror of a future with a man like Marcus Hawthorne. She imagined Elara being cherished not for her strategic value, but for herself. She imagined a life of simple warmth, of genuine laughter, of hands held in affection rather than in contractual agreement. Seraphina pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage. And Elara the fool who had chosen a piece of bread was free. The thought was unbearable. It was an injustice, a cosmic error that had to be rectified. Elara did not deserve that peace. She, Seraphina, was the one who was meant for greatness, for happiness. If she could not have it, then neither could Elara. Her ambition, once a bright flame of hope, began to twist in the cold, lonely darkness of the Stirling mansion. It curdled into something sharp and poisonous, a desperate need not just to survive, but to prove that her choice had been the right one. And the only way to do that was to ensure that Elara's choice led to nothing but misery and dust. 8 years passed. They slipped by, not as a torrent, but as a quiet, steady river shaping the landscape of Elara's life. The frightened, haunted girl of 10 grew into a composed young woman of 18. The tremors of her past life quieted, replaced by the calm, steady hands of a master artisan. Her memories of the Stirlings and the betrayal that had defined her rebirth did not vanish, but they lost their sharp cutting edges, receding into a scar that she knew was there, but no longer ached with every breath. Life in the Grayson household was her anchor. The rhythmic ticking of clocks became the heartbeat of her world. The smell of oiled metal and cedar wood was her home. She had learned the language of gears and springs, the delicate art of persuasion required to make metal bend to her will. Under Arthur's patient tutelage, she mastered the mathematical precision of clockwork. From Eleanor, she learned the soul of the craft, the ability to imbue a functional object with a story, with a delicate, breathtaking beauty. Her work began to speak for itself. It started with small commissions, repairing intricate watches for discerning clients. Then came her own creations, delicate kinetic jewelry, where tiny silver birds would flap their wings, automaton music boxes that played melodies of heartbreaking complexity, and her clocks, which were not merely time-telling devices, but miniature worlds of moving art. The Grayson name, once simply respected, began to be whispered with a new sense of awe in circles that appreciated true craftsmanship. The pinnacle of this new recognition was their invitation to the Royal Artisans Exhibition, the most prestigious event of its kind in the country. It was a place where artisans could showcase their finest work to wealthy patrons, collectors, and the heads of major guilds. For the Graysons, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Their booth was modest, but the work within it was anything but. At the center, on a pedestal of dark velvet, was Elara's masterwork, the Celestial Navigator. It was a clock, but to call it such was an understatement. Encased in glass and silver, it did not just tell the time. A sphere of deep blue lapis lazuli, representing the Earth, rotated slowly at its center. Around it, tiny, perfectly crafted models of the sun, moon, and visible planets traced their orbits in real time, driven by a hidden mechanism of almost impossible complexity. It was a perfect marriage of scientific precision and artistic soul. "It is remarkable," a portly guildmaster said, peering through a jeweler's loupe at the tiny moving planets. "The gearing required. It is the work of a genius." Elara, standing beside her foster father, simply smiled. "Thank you, sir." The challenge was in the miniaturization. Her voice was quiet, but it held the easy confidence of someone who was an absolute master of her domain. She spent the day speaking with admirers and potential clients, explaining the intricate workings of her creations. She saw the society ladies in their silks and jewels, their eyes often skimming past the craft to land on the price tags. She saw the serious collectors whose questions were sharp and knowledgeable. It was a world she had once been destined for, albeit on the other side of the display case. Now she was here on her own terms, her value determined not by a name she had been given, but by the work of her own hands. Late in the afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, a young man stopped before their booth. He was tall and dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that was elegant in its simplicity. He did not look at the other flashier displays. His attention was focused entirely on the celestial navigator, but his expression was not one of mere admiration. It was one of intense analytical concentration, as if he were mentally deconstructing the entire mechanism. Elara felt a strange, faint tremor of recognition, a whisper from a distant memory. After a long moment of silent observation, he looked up and his eyes met hers. They were a startlingly intelligent shade of blue, sharp and discerning. "The escapement," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "You are not using a standard anchor or lever design. It appears to be a variation of a grasshopper escapement, but with a double impulse to reduce friction on the pallets. Am I correct?" Elara was taken aback. It was a highly technical observation, one that only a fellow horologist or a deeply educated connoisseur would make. "You are," she replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. It was necessary to maintain accuracy with the irregular torque from the planetary gear train. The man smiled, a genuine and appreciative expression. "I thought so. It is an ingenious solution. My name is Julian Valerius." The name struck her like a distant bell chime. Valerius. The rivals of the Sterlings. And then the memory solidified. The man at the back of the hall. The sharp suit. The intense, observant eyes. He was older now, his features having sharpened from a youth's promise into a man's handsome reality, but it was him. The mysterious observer from her second day of selection. "Elara Grayson," she replied, her composure steady despite the sudden lurch in her stomach. "It is a pleasure to meet you." "I know who you are," Julian said softly, his gaze holding hers. "I was there 8 years ago, at the Starlight Orphanage." Arthur and Eleanor, who had been speaking with another merchant, turned at the mention of the orphanage, their expressions curious. Elara's mind raced. Why was he here? "What did he want? I remember seeing you," she said carefully. "You were in the back." "I was," he confirmed. "My family makes it a point to observe the movements of our rivals. The Sterling's choice of an heir was a significant event." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "But it was not their choice that I found interesting. It was yours." He stepped closer to the booth, his attention still on the clock, but his words were meant only for her. "For years I could not understand it. Everyone in that room saw you refuse a fortune. They called you a fool. I, however, saw something else. I saw a decision. A deliberate, calculated move that defied all logic. It was the most fascinating strategic play I had ever witnessed." "It was not a strategic play," Elara said quietly. "It was a choice for a different kind of life." "Precisely." Julian's eyes lit up with understanding. "You chose value over price. A concept my family has built its entire philosophy on. It is also, I believe, what allows for the creation of something like this." He gestured to the clock. "This was not made by someone chasing gold. This was made by someone pursuing perfection. I have followed the Grayson name ever since that day. I have seen your work at guild auctions. I have read the articles about the young prodigy artisan. I came here today hoping to meet the girl who chose the bread. I am not disappointed." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. He was not patronizing her, nor was he treating her like a strange curiosity. He was speaking to her as an equal, a peer whose intellect and talent he genuinely respected. It was a novel feeling. Most wealthy men she had encountered either dismissed her or treated her with a cloying condescension. My family's company, Valerius Enterprises, has been looking to partner with artisans of integrity for a new line of luxury goods. Julian continued, his tone shifting slightly to business, yet still retaining its personal warmth. We are tired of the mass-produced, soulless items that our competitors like the Sterlings flood the market with. We want to offer something real, something with a story, like your work. Arthur stepped forward, his expression proud but cautious. We are a small family workshop, Mr. Valerius. We do not have the capacity for large-scale production. I am not interested in large-scale production, Julian countered smoothly, his gaze shifting respectfully to Arthur before returning to Elara. I am interested in excellence. I would like to commission a piece from you, Miss Grayson, a signature timepiece for the Valerius brand, something that represents our shared values of precision, integrity, and timeless quality. And I would like to discuss a longer-term partnership. It was an incredible offer, one that could elevate the Grayson name to international recognition. But more than the business opportunity, Elara felt the weight of the moment. This man had seen through the surface of her actions 8 years ago and understood the core of her reasoning. He had not just observed her. He had understood her. A connection sparked between them, quiet and profound. It was not the fleeting fire of attraction, but the slow, deep burn of recognition. They were two people from vastly different worlds who had somehow arrived at the same conclusion about what truly mattered. I would be honored to discuss it further, Mr. Valerius, Elara said, extending a hand. He took it, his grip firm and respectful. His hand was not soft like a pampered aristocrat's, but it was not calloused like an artisan's either. It was the hand of a man who worked with his mind. Please, he said, his smile reaching his eyes, call me Julian. As he finally left their booth, leaving a business card of heavy, expensive stock on the table, Eleanor looked at Elara, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and motherly intuition. Arthur was simply beaming with pride. But Elara was quiet, her fingers tracing the delicate gears on the silver locket that still hung around her neck. For 8 years she had built a wall around herself, content in her peaceful, isolated world. Julian Valerius was the first person who had not tried to breach that wall, but had instead shown her that he understood exactly why it was built, and that she realized was a far more dangerous and compelling proposition. The quiet river of her life was about to meet the sea. The commission from Julian Valerius was more than just a business arrangement. It was a meeting of minds. Their subsequent discussions took place in the comfortable, creative clutter of the Grayson workshop, a neutral ground where titles and fortunes seemed to dissolve in the scent of sawdust and hot metal. They would spend hours bent over schematics, their conversation a seamless blend of technical jargon and shared philosophy. Julian Elara quickly discovered possessed a mind as intricate as the mechanisms they designed. He understood her work not just as a product, but as a process and art form. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. In turn, she found herself opening up, speaking of her ideas and dreams for the craft with a passion she rarely showed to others. A quiet respect grew between them, solid and true, the foundation for something more that neither yet dared to name. This burgeoning partnership did not go unnoticed. The worlds of high finance and high society were small, intertwined ecosystems where whispers traveled faster than currency. A Valerius commissioning a major piece from an unknown artisan was news. The name Grayson, once obscure, began to appear in financial reports and gossip columns alike. And in the cold marble halls of the Sterling mansion, Seraphina read those columns with a fury that felt like acid in her veins. She was now 18, a poised and beautiful young woman who had mastered the art of wearing a smile like a piece of armor. She was the celebrated heiress of the Sterling fortune. Her every public appearance chronicled, her every gown praised. And she was utterly miserable, the date of her betrothal to the monstrous Marcus Hawthorne looming ever closer. Her life was a meticulously planned performance, and the news of Elara's ascent felt like a disruption, a flaw in the script. Elara was supposed to be a footnote, a cautionary tale of a foolish choice. She was supposed to be languishing in poverty, a target for Seraphina's occasional performative charity. Instead, her name was being linked with Julian Valerius, the one man in the city whose combination of wealth, integrity, and power made him a true prize, far exceeding the brutish Hawthorns. To Seraphina, this was an intolerable theft. Elara, the girl who had thrown away the golden coin, was somehow claiming an even greater treasure. It felt as though fate itself was mocking her. The envy she had harbored for years crystallized into a singular obsessive goal: she had to shatter the connection between Elara and Julian. She had to expose Elara for what Seraphina believed her to be, a clever social climbing peasant who had somehow managed to fool a true aristocrat. She would not make a direct move. The Sterlings had taught her that the most effective attacks are never seen coming. Her stage would be the annual Starlight Charity Gala, the very event meant to raise funds for the orphanage they had both left behind. It was the premier social event of the season, a glittering arena where reputations were made and destroyed. Seraphina, as a prominent alumna and the Sterling heiress, was on the organizing committee. It was a simple matter for her to arrange for a special invitation to be sent to Grayson and daughter in recognition of their inspiring success and contributions to the city's artisanal heritage. It was a public honor, an invitation that was impossible to refuse without appearing ungrateful and churlish. The trap was set. Elara felt a deep unease when the invitation arrived. The world of galas and gowns was one she had deliberately abandoned. It is a business necessity, Arthur reasoned, looking at the embossed invitation with a practical eye. To be seen at these events is to be accepted. It will be good for our reputation. And it is for the orphanage, dear Eleanor added gently. It is a way of giving back. Elara knew they were right, but the thought of entering that world again, a world where Seraphina reigned, sent a cold dread through her. When Julian, who was naturally attending, heard of her invitation, he immediately offered to escort her and her family. It is a dreadful affair, he said with a wry smile during one of their meetings. Full of tedious people saying predictable things. It would be infinitely more bearable with an intelligent conversationalist by my side. His offer was a lifeline, and she accepted with a gratitude that she hoped was not too obvious. The night of the gala, Elara stood before the mirror in a simple, elegant gown of deep sapphire blue. It was a dress Eleanor had made its clean lines and perfect tailoring, a testament to understated skill far more impressive to a discerning eye than the frothy, jewel-encrusted creations favored by the society ladies. Around her neck, the silver locket was her only adornment, a secret source of strength. The ballroom of the Grand Imperial Hotel was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal and gold. An orchestra played softly in the corner, its music a polite murmur beneath the cacophony of conversations. The air was heavy with the scent of 1,000 different perfumes and the metallic tang of ambition. To Elara, it felt less like a party and more like a battlefield. With Julian at her side and her proud parents following, she felt a measure of protection. Julian was a Valerius, and his presence afforded her a level of respect she would not have received on her own. Yet she could still feel the curious glances, hear the whispered questions. Who is she? The Grayson girl. The artisan Julian is so taken with. And then a path cleared through the crowd. Seraphina made her entrance. She was a vision in a gown of shimmering white gold that seemed spun from light itself. A cascade of sterling diamonds glittered at her throat. She moved with the practiced grace of a queen, a serene, benevolent smile on her lips, greeting guests by name, her every gesture a study in polished perfection. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Elara and Julian, her smile widened. Her performance was about to begin. She glided towards them, her approach causing a ripple of attention, guests turning to watch the impending encounter between the city's most celebrated heiress and the girl who had once been her friend. Elara Seraphina's voice was like honeyed wine, warm and inviting. She opened her arms and enveloped Elara in a brief theatrical embrace, her diamonds cold against Elara's skin. My dearest girl, I have been so hoping I would see you here. I have thought of you so often over the years. She pulled back her hands, still resting on Elara's arms, her gaze a perfect imitation of heartfelt concern. You look, well, this simple life, it must agree with you. It was the first salvo, a compliment wrapped around an insult delivered for the benefit of the watching crowd. Elara refused to take the bait. It is good to see you too, Seraphina. You look as lovely as ever, she replied, her voice calm and even. Seraphina's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before she turned her attention to Julian. Julian, darling, she purred, her tone shifting to one of familiar intimacy. It is so good of you to come and support my little cause. It is a worthy cause. Seraphina, Julian replied, his voice polite but cool. His hand rested lightly on the small of Elara's back, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of alliance. Seraphina's eyes flickered to his hand and her smile became sharper. She turned back to Elara, her voice swelling with false magnanimity, loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. It is just so wonderful what you have done, Elara. Truly, to build something for yourself from nothing. I always worried after you made that brave choice at the orphanage. I have told Father a dozen times that the Sterling Foundation should offer you a grant, a proper one to help you get by. The implication was clear. Elara was a charity case, a struggling pauper. We are doing quite well on our own, Seraphina. Elara said, her voice still quiet, but now with an edge of cool steel. But thank you for your concern. Seraphina was not deterred. This was her arena, and she was a master of its cruel games. She let out a soft, pitying laugh. Oh, of course you are. And it is so wonderfully noble of you, Julian, she said, looking at him now, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. To take such an interest in the less fortunate, championing the working classes. It speaks so well of your character. Most men in your position would not be so charitable with their time. The final venomous dart was fired. She had done it. In a few perfectly crafted sentences, she had reduced Elara to a pathetic, impoverished project and Julian to a patronizing aristocrat. She had framed their entire relationship, which Elara knew was built on intellectual respect, as an act of pity. The conversations around them had died down. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how the humble artisan girl would respond to being so publicly and artfully put in her place by the radiant Sterling heiress. Seraphina held her pose, her face a mask of sweet concern, her eyes glittering with the cold, hard certainty of her victory. The silence that followed Seraphina's pronouncement was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked the air from the space around them. All eyes were on Elara. The crowd waited for the expected reaction. The blush of shame, the angry retort, the stammered defense. They saw none of it. Elara stood perfectly still for a moment, her expression unreadable. She did not look at the pitying faces around her, nor did she wither under the weight of their collective gaze. Instead, she met Seraphina's triumphant stare with a look of calm, almost clinical assessment. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of mirth, but of understanding. Charity is a noble word. Seraphina. Elara said, her voice soft but carrying with perfect clarity in the sudden quiet. It was not the voice of a victim, but of a teacher. But I think perhaps we understand it differently. She gently detached herself from Seraphina's lingering hold and took a half-step back, creating her own space. Her gaze drifted for a second to the glittering diamond necklace at Seraphina's throat. You see value in things like these, she continued, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing a philosophical point rather than engaging in a social execution. And they are beautiful. Their value is declared. It is set by a market, by demand, by the name of the man who dug them from the earth and the one who sold them. It is a value that is given to them. She then lifted her own hand, not to show it empty, but to gesture with it the hand of a creator. An artisan, however, believes in a different kind of value. It is the value that is earned. It is not given, it is built. It is the 1,000 hours of practice to steady the hand, the 100 hours of study to understand the materials, the lifetime of passion required to breathe soul into something inanimate. Her eyes came back to Seraphina, and they were filled not with anger but with a profound, unshakable certainty. My foster parents, the Graysons, gave me the greatest charity of all. They did not give me an allowance. They gave me a skill. Julian is not being charitable with his time. He is investing in that skill. The relationship between a patron and an artisan is one of mutual respect, not pity. It is a partnership in the creation of value, not a transaction of wealth. The narrative had been flipped. The words pity and charity now sounded crass and simplistic in the face of Elara's eloquent defense of her life's work. The whispers in the crowd began to change their texture. The pity was gone, replaced by a murmur of surprise and a dawning respect. Seraphina's smile was beginning to look brittle, like a pane of glass with a crack forming at its edge. This was not how the script was supposed to go. Elara was not finished. She let her gaze sweep over the opulent ballroom, over the wealthy guests who were now hanging on her every word. This gala is for the orphanage we both came from, she said, her voice resonating with a new warmth and power. And the greatest gift we can give those children is not the promise of a golden coin. It is the promise that they too can create their own value, that the worth of their lives will not be determined by the family that chooses them, but by the work of their own hands and the strength of their own character. That is a fortune no one can ever take away from you. It was a masterstroke. She had not only defended herself, She had elevated the entire theme of the evening, turning Seraphina's shallow personal attack into a profound statement of purpose. She had reminded everyone in the room of the true meaning of charity, making Seraphina's earlier comments seem not just cruel but shamefully trivial. A silence followed deeper this time, pregnant with the weight of Elara's words. It was broken by a single clear voice. "Well said, young lady. Very well said indeed." The speaker was the Duchess of Albret, an elderly, formidable woman known for her sharp mind and her even sharper tongue. She was the undisputed matriarch of the city's old money aristocracy, and her opinion could make or break a reputation overnight. She moved toward Elara, her gaze sweeping over Seraphina with a look of undisguised disapproval. "It is refreshing to hear someone in this room speak of worth, rather than cost." The Duchess declared, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Elara. "You are the Grayson girl, are you not? The one who makes those remarkable clocks. I would like to see your work. Perhaps you might have time to call on me next week." It was not a request. It was a command and a seal of the highest social approval. The spell was broken. Seraphina's attack had not just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular way. She was left standing alone, her performance revealed as nothing more than petty cruelty. The crowd, always eager to side with a new victor, began to move away from her, their conversations now buzzing with admiration for the eloquent artisan and her powerful new patron. Seraphina's face was a mask of cold fury. The benevolent smile had vanished, leaving behind the hard, ugly lines of defeat. She shot Elara a look of pure venom, a silent promise of future retribution, before turning on her heel and stalking away, her glittering gown now seeming less like a symbol of triumph and more like the costume of a failed actress. Julian, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, now looked at Elara with an expression of profound admiration. He had trusted her to handle it, and she had exceeded his every expectation. "My father once told me that the strongest swords are not the ones that clang the loudest, but the ones that cut the cleanest." He said, his voice low, and meant only for her. "I have just witnessed a master swordsman at work." A genuine smile, the first of the evening, finally graced Elara's lips. "She chose the wrong battlefield," she said softly. "This has never been about money for me. She cannot understand that." No, Julian agreed. She cannot. Later, after the Duchess had departed and the buzz had died down, Julian led Elara and her parents to a quieter terrace overlooking the city lights. Arthur was practically vibrating with pride, while Eleanor simply squeezed Elara's hand, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I have attended these events my entire life," Julian said, leaning against the balustrade next to Elara. "I have seen fortunes won and lost, political careers made and broken within these walls. It is almost always a sordid, ugly business." He turned to look at her, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "Tonight, for the first time, I saw someone win, not by being richer, or more powerful, or more ruthless, but simply by being better, by having more substance." It was inspiring. The connection between them, once a spark of intellectual curiosity, now felt like a steady, warm flame. In that moment, he was not Julian Valerius, the powerful heir, and she was not Elara Grayson, the humble artisan. They were just two people who saw the world in the same way, standing together against a tide of shallowness. Elara looked out at the sprawling city. Down in one of those warm, clustered lights was the small workshop she called home. Up here in this world of cold glitter, she had faced the ghost of her past life and had not flinched. She had spoken her truth, and she had been heard. She had earned her place not by accepting a gift of gold, but by demonstrating her own intrinsic worth. Her silver locket felt warm against her skin. It was her shield, her symbol. Seraphina had the diamonds and the wealth, but Elara had a strength that no amount of money could buy. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, she felt ready for it. Defeat was a foreign and bitter taste to Seraphina. In the silent, opulent prison of the Sterling Mansion, she replayed the scene at the gala again and again. Each time, the memory of Elara's quiet dignity and the Duchess's cutting approval was like a physical blow. She had not just been beaten, she had been made to look foolish, her power rendered impotent by the very girl she had intended to crush. The humiliation was a fire in her blood, burning away the last vestiges of her childish envy and forging it into something cold, hard, and ruthless. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Lord Sterling. She did not enter his study as a supplicant, or a disappointed child. She walked in with the cold composure he had always demanded of her, her face a mask of calculated gravity. "Father," she began, her voice even. Last night was not merely a social embarrassment. It was a strategic probe by the House of Valerius. Lord Sterling looked up from his papers, his interest piqued by her choice of words. "The Grayson girl is irrelevant," Seraphina continued, echoing his own words from years ago. "She is, however, a tool. Julian Valerius is using her, elevating her to make a public statement. He is testing our influence, demonstrating that he can create a success story right under our noses. He made the Sterling family's patronage look foolish by championing the very person who publicly rejected it." She let the words hang in the air, framing her personal vendetta in the language he understood best: power strategy and rivalry. "It was an insult to our name. If we allow a Valerius proxy to flourish, it will be perceived as weakness. We must respond." A slow, reptilian smile spread across Lord Sterling's face. He was not looking at a distraught girl seeking revenge. He was looking at an heiress who had finally learned to think like him. She was turning her humiliation into a weapon. "And what do you propose?" he asked, testing her. "The Grayson workshop is a sapling," Seraphina said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is fragile. We must pull it out by the roots, deny them their sun and water. We will instruct our subsidiaries to apply pressure on their suppliers. Every shipment of rare wood, every ounce of refined metal will be denied to them. We will have our agents in the guilds spread rumors about their quality and financial instability. Every significant client they have will receive a better offer from a Sterling-backed artisan. We will not just bankrupt them, we will erase them. And in doing so, we will send a message to Julian Valerius: the ground he walks on belongs to us." Lord Sterling leaned back in his chair, a look of genuine pride in his cold eyes. This was the daughter he had been trying to create. This was the steel. This was the stone. "Very well," he said. "You will oversee the operation yourself. Do not fail." "I will not," Seraphina promised, and for the first time she felt a true exhilarating surge of power. It was dark and destructive, but it was hers. The first tremor hit the Grayson workshop a week later. It was a letter from Bohannon Timbers, their exclusive supplier of the rare rosewood and burl walnut that were signatures of their craft. It was a partnership that had lasted for 2 generations. The letter was short, formal, and devastating. Citing a sudden and irreversible strategic restructuring, Bohannon was terminating their supply contract effective immediately. "This makes no sense," Arthur Grayson muttered, reading the letter for the 5th time, his brow deeply furrowed. "I spoke with old man Bohannon just last month. We were planning a new shipment." Eleanor tried to be optimistic. "Perhaps it is just as it says, dear, a business decision. We will find another supplier." But when Arthur began making inquiries, he found every door inexplicably closed. Other high-end timber merchants were suddenly out of stock, or unable to take on new clients, or quoting prices so astronomically high they were clearly a refusal. A chill of unease began to settle over the workshop. Then the second tremor hit. The Duchess of Albrecht's steward sent a polite but firm message canceling her appointment with Elara. He offered no explanation, only regrets. Within the day, 3 other major commissions, all secured in the heady aftermath of the gala, were cancelled in a similar fashion. The phone, which had been ringing with inquiries, fell silent. The atmosphere in the workshop, once a haven of creative focus, grew thick with anxiety. The rhythmic ticking of the clocks now seemed to mock them, counting down to a disaster they could not see. Elara knew with a cold certainty that settled in the pit of her stomach that this was not a string of bad luck. This was an attack. This was Seraphina's promised retribution. The final crushing wave of the assault came a few days later in the form of rumors. Like a foul miasma, they seeped into the guilds and marketplaces. The Graysons were using inferior materials. Their mechanisms were prone to failure. They were deeply in debt, on the verge of collapse. The stories were baseless, but they were pervasive and poisonous. Long-term customers grew hesitant. Repair jobs, their bread and butter, began to dry up. The workshop became a fortress under siege. The hum of work was replaced by the tense silence of waiting. Arthur's face grew gaunt with worry, the lines around his kind eyes deepening. Eleanor tried to keep their spirits up, but Elara could see the fear she was trying to hide. Their life's work, their heritage, was being dismantled piece by piece. Julian called, his voice tight with anger. It is Sterling, he confirmed, his spies having traced the pressure campaign back to its source. They are strong-arming everyone, Elara, from suppliers to clients. It is a full-scale economic assault. I can help. The Valerius family can extend you a line of credit, get you the materials you need through our own channels. Elara relayed the offer to Arthur, but her foster father, a man of immense pride, shook his head stubbornly. We do not take charity, Elara. We have never taken charity. To take his money now would be to prove Seraphina right. This is not charity. It is a lifeline. Elara argued, her frustration mounting. It is an investment, just as you said. No, Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. This is our battle. We will not be Valerius dependents. We are Graysons. The argument was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. It was a courier bearing an official-looking envelope. Arthur opened it, his hands trembling slightly. His face went ashen. What is it? Eleanor whispered. It is an eviction notice, Arthur said, his voice hollow. From the building's owner. Our lease is being terminated. They have sold the building. He looked at the deed of sale attached. The buyer is a company I have never heard of. The Alistair Investment Group. Alistair. Lord Sterling's first name. It was a final, brutal checkmate. They had not just attacked their business, they were taking their home. They were being wiped off the map. Eleanor finally broke down, sinking into a chair with a soft sob. Arthur stood frozen, the papers rattling in his hand, his face a mask of utter defeat. The warmth had fled the room, leaving a bone-deep chill in its wake. All around them, the clocks continued to tick, each sound a hammer blow marking the end of their world. Elara looked at her parents, at their broken spirits, and the last of her fear burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding anger. Seraphina had mistaken their peacefulness for weakness. She had mistaken their integrity for fragility. They were grave errors. She walked over to her own workbench, her movements calm and deliberate. She picked up a heavy steel watchmaker's hammer, its weight familiar and solid in her palm. The time for quiet dignity was over. The time for defense had passed. They had attacked her family, her home. They had declared war. And she would not be the only one to bleed. The silence in the workshop was heavy with the dust of shattered dreams. Eleanor's quiet sobs were the only sound, a heartbreaking counterpoint to the relentless ticking of the clocks. Arthur stood like a statue, carved from grief, the eviction notice a death sentence in his hand. This was the end Seraphina had engineered, not a swift execution, but a slow, suffocating strangulation. Into this tableau of despair, Elara stepped forward. She placed the heavy watchmaker's hammer back on its rack with a soft, definitive click. The sound cut through the room, drawing her parents' tear-filled eyes. No, Elara said, her voice devoid of the sorrow that filled the room. It was cold, clear, and hard as tempered steel. This is not the end. Arthur looked at her, his expression weary. Child, what can we do? They have all the money, all the power. They have bought the law. We have nothing. That is not true, Elara countered, walking to the center of the room. She was no longer a daughter seeking comfort. She was a general taking command of a routed army. We have the one thing they cannot buy and do not understand. We have our skill. We have our integrity. And right now, those are weapons. She turned to her father. They have built an empire on a reputation for perfection, for quality. That is the foundation of the Sterling brand. But it is a lie. I know it is. In my studies of their work, I have seen that they always value profit over process. Their foundation is hollow, and we are going to put a crack in it. A knock at the door made them all jump. It was Julian, his face grim. He had heard about the eviction. He stepped inside, bringing with him the cold night air and an aura of controlled fury. I came as soon as I heard. Elara, you must let me help. I can have my lawyers fight this, I can. Your lawyers will be fighting their lawyers in a system their money controls. Julian, Elara interrupted, her focus unwavering. We would be fighting on their battlefield. We need to make them fight on ours. She looked at him, her eyes burning with an intense, fierce light. I need your help, but not your money. I need your intelligence. I need to know what is the Sterling Corporation's proudest, most expensive, most visible new product. Julian paused, his strategic mind immediately grasping the direction she was headed. The despair in the room was being replaced by a thrilling, dangerous current of rebellion. That would be the Ethelred chronograph, he answered without hesitation. Launched 2 months ago with a marketing campaign that cost more than this entire city block. It is being sold as the pinnacle of horological engineering, a masterpiece of sterling craftsmanship. They are selling it for a fortune. Then that is our target, Elara declared. Get me one. Elara, what are you planning? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Seraphina thinks this is a war of attrition. Elara explained, her voice low and rapid. She will bleed us dry. But we are not going to fight that war. We are going to make a single precision strike. I am going to dissect that watch, and I am going to find the lie at its heart. And then we are going to show it to the world. For the first time in days, a flicker of the old artisan's fire returned to Arthur's eyes. He looked at his daughter, at the brilliant, unyielding woman she had become, and he saw the beautiful, intricate mechanism of her mind at work. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Show me the battlefield. 2 days later, a discreet, unmarked package arrived at the workshop. Inside, nestled in a silk-lined case that was a work of art in itself, was the Ethelred chronograph. It was a stunning object, its platinum case gleaming its sapphire crystal face, revealing a complex and beautiful array of dials and hands. It radiated an aura of flawless perfection. They gathered around the main workbench, which Elara had cleared and cleaned until it shone. It was no longer a craftsman's table, it was an operating theater. It is perfect. Arthur breathed, his expert eye tracing the flawless finishing on the case. The polishing, the weight, the balance. I can find no fault. The fault will not be on the surface, Elara said, her own tools laid out in a precise surgical row. The lie is always hidden. For hours they worked under the bright, focused light of a single lamp. The process of disassembly was a tense, delicate dance. Elara's hands were steady, her movements economical and precise. Arthur assisted, his decades of experience allowing him to anticipate her every need. They removed the back casing, revealing the movement within. It was a symphony of gold and brass, hundreds of tiny gleaming components working in perfect harmony. To the naked eye, it was a marvel. They examined each bridge, each wheel, each jewel-tipped lever. Every component was perfectly machined, flawlessly finished. As the hours passed, Arthur's shoulders began to slump. I see nothing, Elara. He admitted, his voice heavy with disappointment. It is as they claim. A masterpiece. Perhaps we were wrong. No. Elara insisted, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She was not just looking at the components. She was thinking about the philosophy behind them. The sterling philosophy. Profit over process. Where would they cut a corner? Where could they save a sliver of cost without it being immediately obvious? Her mind drifted back to a memory from her past life, a conversation she had overheard between Lord Sterling and one of his engineers. They were discussing a luxury automaton, and the engineer was worried about the longevity of a specific high-friction component. Lord Sterling had dismissed his concerns. It only needs to work perfectly for the first few years, he had said. Long enough to build the reputation. By the time it fails, it will be out of warranty, and we will have a new model to sell them. She focused on the chronograph's core mechanism, the part that engaged when the stopwatch function was used. It was the most complex, highest-stress part of the watch, and deep inside it, almost completely obscured by layers of intricate bridgework, was a single small lever, the clutch yoke. It was the part that had to move with incredible speed and precision, withstanding immense force every time the chronograph was started, stopped, and reset. That one, she whispered, pointing with the tip of a fine tweezer. Hand me the microspectrometer. Julian had provided the advanced diagnostic tool, a piece of equipment far beyond their own means. It could analyze the precise metallic composition of an object. Carefully, Arthur isolated the tiny lever. Elara placed it under the lens. They watched the screen as the analysis ran. The results scrolled into view. The main components of the watch were, as expected, made from a high-grade durable brass and steel alloy. But the clutch yoke, the critical component, was different. There, Elara said, her voice a triumphant hiss. There it is. The analysis showed that the lever was made from a cheaper, softer metal alloy, one with a significantly lower wear resistance, plated to look identical to the others. It was a brilliant, cynical piece of engineering. It would perform perfectly for a year, maybe 2. But with regular use, the softer metal would inevitably wear down, causing the entire chronograph mechanism to fail. It was a flaw so deep, so deliberate, that it could only be one thing: fraud. They were selling the promise of a lifetime of perfection, knowing it was built to break. They had found the lie. A grim satisfaction settled over the room. They now held the reputation of the House of Sterling in the palm of their hands, condensed into a single tiny piece of flawed metal. "Now," Julian said, his voice hard, "how do we use it?" "We do not leak it to the gossip columns," Elara said immediately. "That is their method. Ours will be different. It will be precise and undeniable." She looked at her mother. "Eleanor, your engraving skills are the steadiest in the city. Can you create a magnified diagram of this component etched onto a steel plate, showing the material analysis and the projected points of failure?" Eleanor's hands, which had been trembling with fear for days, were now perfectly still. "I can." Elara turned to Arthur. "We will reassemble the watch, but we will replace the flawed sterling component with a properly engineered one of our own making, one that will last a century." And finally, she looked at Julian. "Your lawyers will prepare a case, but we will not file it yet. First, we will send a package. One to the Guild of Horologists, one to the editor of the Financial Times, and one to the Duchess of Albret. Each package will contain Eleanor's etched diagram, a sworn affidavit from Arthur attesting to the flaw, and a formal challenge from Grayson and daughter to the Sterling Corporation." "A challenge?" Julian asked, intrigued. "A public challenge," Elara confirmed, a fierce smile touching her lips for the first time. "We will challenge them to a live public disassembly of 2 ethel-red watches, one our modified version, the other a new one purchased from them by an anonymous third party. We will invite the best horologists in the country to serve as judges. We will let them see the truth with their own eyes." She picked up the small flawed lever with her tweezers, holding it up to the light. It looked so insignificant. Seraphina had used the brute force of an empire to try and crush them. She had sent a hurricane. But Elara, with the quiet precision of an artisan, had found the single loose screw that could bring the entire machine crashing down. The challenge, once issued, was a trap forged from honor and arrogance. For the Sterling Corporation to refuse a public examination of their flagship product would be a confession of guilt. To accept was to walk onto a battlefield of Elara's choosing, armed with weapons they did not understand. Trapped by their own hubris, they accepted. Lord Sterling's public statement was a masterpiece of condescending dismissal, calling it a desperate cry for attention from a minor competitor and welcoming the opportunity to publicly vindicate the Sterling standard of excellence. The chosen venue was the Grand Assembly Hall of the Royal Horologists Guild, a place of academic solemnity and unimpeachable integrity. The air within was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to vibrate in the silent, waiting air. The audience was a curated collection of the city's most influential figures, guild masters, with faces as stern as their principals, sharp-eyed journalists from the Financial Times, and a gallery of aristocrats, including the Duchess of Albret, who watched from the front row with the keen interest of a hawk. On one side of a long mahogany table sat a team of 3 of the Sterling's top engineers, led by a man with a supercilious sneer. Behind them in the first row sat Lord Alistair Sterling, his face a mask of iron composure, and beside him, Seraphina, a vision in emerald green, her serene smile looking brittle and out of place. On the other side of the table were only 2 people, Arthur Grayson and his daughter, Elara. Their workspace was clear, their tools arranged with quiet precision. Julian stood a few feet behind them, a silent, steady presence. In the center of the table, under the bright, unforgiving glare of gas lamps, lay 2 identical ethel-red chronographs. One, designated Watch A, had been anonymously purchased by Julian's agents that very morning. The other, Watch B, was the one Elara and Arthur had modified. Presiding over the event was a panel of 3 of the most respected watchmakers in the nation, their faces grim and impartial. The lead judge, a man with wispy white hair and eyes that had seen the inside of a million machines, struck a small bell. "The proceedings will begin," he announced. "The Sterling team will first disassemble a standard movement to establish a baseline of quality. Then the Grayson team will proceed with their examination of watches A and B." The Sterling engineers worked with a slick, practiced efficiency, their commentary filled with technical jargon designed to impress and intimidate. They displayed the components of a standard movement, extolling the virtues of their flawless manufacturing. It was a tedious, arrogant performance. Then it was Elara's turn. She and Arthur moved with a silent, symbiotic grace. There was no commentary, no showmanship. There was only the work. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath as they began to disassemble Watch A, the new, unaltered timepiece. The silence was broken only by the faint, precise clicks of their tools. Elara's focus was absolute. This was her world. She was not a poor orphan or a social upstart here. She was a master of her craft, and the machine was her language. With practiced ease, she worked her way through the layers of the complex mechanism, each movement revealing another layer of the beautiful, intricate lie. Finally, she reached the heart of the chronograph. With a pair of fine tweezers, she extracted the clutch yoke. She placed the tiny, gleaming component into a small velvet-lined tray and pushed it toward the judges. "We submit this component from Watch A for analysis," she said, her voice clear and steady. The judges moved with solemn purpose. The microspectrometer was brought forward. The component was placed under its lens. The results of the analysis were projected onto a large screen for the entire hall to see. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The screen showed in stark, undeniable figures the composition of a cheaper, inferior alloy. It was irrefutable. Lord Sterling's face, which had been a mask of bored confidence, seemed to visibly harden, turning the color of old stone. Seraphina's smile vanished completely, leaving her face pale and pinched. Now the lead judge said, his voice grave, "We will examine the corresponding component from Watch B." Arthur, with a quiet flourish, presented the second clutch yoke, the one they had crafted themselves from superior high-grade steel. The analysis was run again. The screen displayed the data for a metal that was stronger, more durable, and vastly more expensive. And finally, Elara announced, her voice ringing with the clear tone of victory, "We will reassemble Watch A with the component from Watch B." With a few swift, expert movements, she fitted their own superior component into the Sterling watch. She made a few adjustments, then wound the watch and activated the chronograph. It worked perfectly. More than perfectly. The engagement was smoother, the action cleaner. The experts in the front rows could hear the difference in the quiet, crisp click of the mechanism. The lead judge stood. "The findings of this panel are unanimous," he declared, his voice booming through the silent hall. "We have found conclusive evidence of a significant undisclosed material substitution in a critical component of the Ethelred chronograph. The practice is deceptive and represents a profound betrayal of the standards of our guild and the trust of the public." The dam broke. The journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The flash of a photographer's camera went off, capturing the stony, thunderous expression on Lord Sterling's face. The room erupted in a storm of shocked, angry whispers. The Sterling reputation for perfection, cultivated over decades, had been shattered in a single afternoon by a girl they had dismissed as irrelevant. Amid the chaos, Seraphina felt the floor drop out from beneath her world. It was over. The humiliation at the gala was nothing compared to this public technical execution. Her future as the bride of Marcus Hawthorne, her place in society, her very identity as a Sterling, it was all turning to ash. She looked at Elara, who stood calm and victorious beside her father, being congratulated by the Duchess. She saw no triumph in Elara's eyes, only a quiet, resolute vindication. And in that moment, Seraphina's terror and despair curdled into a final apocalyptic rage. If her world was going to burn, she would take everyone else's with it. Elara, Julian, her own cold-hearted foster father, they would all burn together. She had prepared for this. A contingency. A dead man's switch. Slipping away from her father's side amidst the commotion, she exited the hall through a side door. Her movements were quick and furtive. In a quiet, darkened alleyway behind the guild, a man in a rumpled coat was waiting in the shadows. He was an information broker, a man who traded in secrets and ruin. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. Seraphina did not answer. She pushed a heavy leather-bound ledger into his hands. "Publish it all," she said, her own voice unrecognizable, flat, and dead. "Tonight." The man opened the ledger, his eyes widening as he scanned the first few pages under the light of a distant gas lamp. He had been expecting the details of the watch fraud. What he saw was so much more. The omniscient eye of the narrator would see the full scope of her betrayal. The ledger contained not just the technical specifications of the fraudulent watch component, but the secret financial records of the entire Sterling Empire. Details of illegal market manipulation, slush funds used for political bribes, blackmail material on judges and city officials. It was enough to utterly destroy the House of Sterling, to send her foster father to prison for the rest of his life. But her spite was not reserved only for the Sterlings. The final section of the ledger contained her ultimate act of vengeance. During her time as a Sterling, she had been given access to certain sensitive information regarding their rivals. Using a combination of seduction, bribery, and theft, She had managed to acquire a portfolio of the Valerius family's most sensitive trade secrets, details of their shipping routes, confidential investment plans, and the proprietary formula for a new alloy they were developing. It was information that in the hands of their competitors would cripple them for years. She was lashing out at Julian, the man who had stood by Elara's side, the man who represented the life of integrity she secretly coveted and despised. The broker looked at her, a flicker of something that might have been awe in his cynical eyes. This will start a war. I am counting on it, Seraphina replied. She turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymous shadows of the city. She had thrown a torch into the powder keg of the city's elite. She had betrayed her family, her benefactor, and the very system that had created her. She had nothing left to lose, and in the ensuing chaos under the smoke of two burning empires she intended to disappear. The victory in the Guildhall was a clean, sharp note that hung in the air for only a moment before being swallowed by a thunderclap. Seraphina's final act of betrayal was not a whisper, it was a detonation. By morning, the city was in chaos. The early editions of the newspapers, printed with sensational banner headlines, were snatched up from street corners. The Sterling Empire, a house of cards, fraud, bribery, and corruption exposed. But it was the secondary headlines that sent a chill through the financial district and a jolt of alarm through Julian. Valerius trade secrets leaked in Sterling data dump. The storm had broken, and its fury was indiscriminate. While authorities in official-looking black carriages descended upon the Sterling mansion, placing Lord Alistair under arrest as he was still in his morning robe, a different kind of siege was taking place at the Valerius headquarters. The stock market had opened to a frenzy of panic selling. Competitors were already moving to exploit the leaked shipping routes. The air was thick with betrayal and the metallic scent of financial blood. Julian stood in the center of his father's office, a whirlwind of panicked aides and shouting clerks around him. He was a captain on the bridge of a ship that had just been torpedoed. For a moment, faced with the sheer scale of the treachery, he felt a wave of despair. Seraphina had not just attacked his business. She had attacked his family's legacy, a legacy built on the very integrity she sought to mock. His first clear thought in the chaos was of Elara. He sent a messenger to the Grayson workshop with a simple, urgent note. I need your clarity. Come if you can. When Elara arrived, she found a scene of controlled panic. She walked through the chaos of the Valerius offices, a small, calm island in a raging sea. Julian met her, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes cleared slightly at the sight of her. He led her into the relative quiet of the office. She gave them everything he said, his voice raw. Our investment strategies, our supplier lists, even the research for the new alloy. We are exposed on every front. Elara listened patiently, her artisan's mind processing the problem, not as an emotional crisis, but as a complex mechanism that had been deliberately broken. You cannot fight a rumor by denying it, she said softly, her voice cutting through his anxiety. You can only fight it by showing a stronger truth. What truth? Julian asked, gesturing to the stacks of paper detailing the leaks. The truth is, our secrets are out there for everyone to see. No, Elara corrected him gently. That is not the whole truth. That is Seraphina's truth, a story of betrayal and weakness. Your truth is how you built this company. Your truth is in your integrity. The Sterlings are being exposed as liars. You must be exposed as honest. His head came up, a spark of understanding in his eyes. Radical transparency, he breathed. Exactly, she affirmed. You cannot retract the leaked data, so get ahead of it. Release a public statement. Acknowledge the theft. Confirm the data is yours, and then show them what it really means. Show them that your investment strategies are based on long-term growth, not hostile takeovers. Show them that your supplier lists are built on loyal, decades-long partnerships, not strong-arm tactics. Show them the truth behind the secrets. The Sterling secrets were rotten to the core. You must prove that yours are not. It was a bold, terrifying strategy. To willingly open their books to expose themselves further went against every instinct of their secretive, competitive world. But Julian saw the brilliant logic in her plan. In a world suddenly drowning in lies, the only life raft was the unvarnished truth. For the next 18 hours they worked. Elara remained by Julian's side, a quiet, clarifying presence. While Julian and his team drafted press releases and prepared financial disclosures, Elara, with her eye for detail and her simple, direct logic, helped them craft a narrative. It was not a story of damage control. It was a reaffirmation of the Valerius identity. By the time the sun rose again, their counterattack was launched. It was not a barrage of denials, but a flood of honesty. The gamble paid off. The market, which had been in freefall, began to stabilize. Faced with the stark contrast between the proven corruption of the Sterlings and the startling honesty of the Valerius family investors, and the public began to choose a side. The Valerius name was damaged, yes, but its reputation for integrity, though battered, had ultimately held. They had weathered the storm. The dust settled over the next few weeks. The Sterling Empire had ceased to exist. Its assets were seized, its name a permanent stain in the annals of the city's history. Lord Sterling stripped of his power, and wealth awaited a trial he could not win. Seraphina's flight from justice was short-lived. She was apprehended at a remote border crossing her fine gowns, replaced by drab traveling clothes, her remaining diamonds sewn into the hem of her cloak. She was alone, out of money and out of allies. When the authorities took her into custody, she did not fight. There was nothing left to fight for. Her war against the world had ended in her own solitary confinement. One crisp autumn afternoon, a month after the storm had passed, the Grayson workshop was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the silence of anxiety, but of peace. The eviction notice had been rescinded, the building's ownership having been transferred to the city. Their old clients, full of apologies, had returned. The Duchess of Albrecht's commission was already underway. The workshop was filled with the familiar, comforting sounds of creation. Arthur was meticulously assembling a new clock, a soft smile on his face. Eleanor was humming as she polished a silver casing. Julian was there, seated at a small table with Elara. They were not discussing business. They were simply sketching, sharing ideas for a small personal project. He looked around the warm, cluttered room, at the ticking clocks, at the loving, quiet industry of the family. He had spent his life in mansions, but he had never felt more at home. After everything, he said, softly, looking at Elara, "After you brought down one empire and saved another, what will you do now?" Elara looked up from her sketch, a smudge of graphite on her cheek. She did not look to the future or to the city beyond the window. Her gaze fell on the silver locket that rested at her throat. She touched it, its familiar weight a constant comfort. She looked at Arthur's focused expression, at Eleanor's gentle smile. She looked at Julian, at the quiet admiration in his eyes. Her own smile was serene, filled with a light that came from deep within. "What will I do?" she repeated softly. "Julian, I am already doing it." She had everything she had ever truly wanted. She had her family. She had her craft. She had a love built on a foundation of respect and truth. She had chosen the bread, and it had given her a feast. The choice was made, the journey was over, and she was finally peacefully home. In the grand and often complex design of our lives, we are all faced with a choice. It may not come in the form of a golden coin or a piece of dry bread, but the essence is the same. It is the choice between the glittering promise of what is given and the quiet, steadfast value of what is earned. Seraphina's story is a tragic reminder that a life spent chasing the possessions of others will leave one with nothing of their own. Elara's journey teaches us a more hopeful lesson, that true wealth is not a thing to be won, but a character to be built. It is forged in the fires of integrity, shaped by the hands of honest labor, and polished by the steady force of love. The most valuable things in life are not those with the highest price, but those with the deepest meaning. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like these are a reminder that the greatest battles are fought not on fields of war, but within the quiet chambers of the human heart. If Elara's story resonated with you, we hope you will support our channel by liking this video and subscribing for more tales of resilience, integrity, and the quiet triumphs of the human spirit. Your support allows us to continue crafting these narratives for you. Until next time, may you always recognize the value in your own hands.